Is our deep state sitting on free energy? The idea that we could travel instantaneously to different parts of the world for free? Could we heat our homes, run all of our devices on free energy? Well, that's been the subject of what our next guest has been focused on for quite a while now. Not only his investigations into the disappearance of MH370, which has led him, I think, to uncover this one of the most remarkable stories of our time, the idea of etheric energy, free energy for all of us that's been kept secret. My guest is Ashton Forbes. He's an investigator. He's a physicist, and he's been on this story from the very beginning. And I want to welcome Ashton back to the show. Ashton, I think our last interview that we did here on the show has millions of views at this point, and you've got quite a few new pieces of the missing MH370 aircraft, along with aliens. We're going to talk about drones. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Clayton. Thank you for having me. Your audience is awesome. I loved getting all the feedback, and I'm so glad that this information, this science is starting to get more and more mainstream.
Absolutely. And I think, it all started with MH370, and we'll get into the free energy piece of this, but I have to ask you, given all of the news since right after the election, of course, weeks and weeks and weeks of drone activity. I've been calling them UFOs because they are unidentified. They immediately started calling them drones right out of the gate, like that was what the media was saying. I was a little skeptical of that nomenclature, but now we're hearing all sorts of reports about missing nuclear material, missing radioactive material. Why are these things flying at night? If they're drones that you can't see, they're maybe looking for radioactive material that's gone missing. Is this a giant false flag? Is something bigger happening here? Our elected leaders don't seem to have any answers at all about this. Shoot them down, don't shoot them down. Yet we spend $1 trillion a year on a defense budget, and we don't know what these are. So just let's, at a high level, I want to get your assessment of what you think these things are, and when you started seeing all of this come together, what did you make of it?
Yeah, and just like you just said, we found as part of the MH370 investigation, we looked into the surveillance capabilities, especially the satellite capabilities of the intelligence community. So we know that we've got full motion video coverage of the entire planet. This was actually admitted to in the UFO hearing just a month ago by both Michael Schellenberger and Tim Gallaudet. So we know what these drones are. Maybe the FBI doesn't know because they don't have access to that information, but the NRO, the CIA, the NSA, the NGA, these organizations know exactly what these drones are. So the question is, why are they lying to us about them? And I also think that drones has become the code word for UFOs now as well, which should make us wonder, what are these things flying around? Is there even somebody inside of some of these UFOs that we're seeing? Is that even a requirement? The theory that I kind of like the best, and also, I just want to point out that Congress is apparently getting a classified briefing about these drones that are flying around as well. So if there was nothing there, why would they be getting a classified briefing about it? And
Right.
some of the sightings have indicated that they are transmedium, that they might be coming out of the water. In other cases, they've been saying that they're not giving off any signals or any frequencies, which I'm not really sure what that means. But these could be some of the observables that we see in UFOs. Now, the flip side of it is there is mass hysteria going on right now. We've reached a point now where this is like, it's a self-perpetuating thing where people are now just misidentifying planes and other stuff, and they're claiming that they are, these UFOs or drones when they probably aren't. So there's a lot of mud in the water that's making it very difficult to sift through. The only way we could really get forward on an answer is if we were to get high quality, like military or intelligence grade, like infrared footage of one of these things where we could actually analyze it. And I think the likelihood of that is slim. Now, my personal theory that I like, that Clint Russell and I were talking about just a couple of days ago, was this idea that, like, what if these are some type of defense mechanism, like a mesh network, like a fence, essentially, that is set up, ready to intercept some type of hypersonic weapon, either coming from outer space or coming from like a submarine off the coast or somewhere else, where seconds matter. And even the deployment time would make it less likely that you'd be able to intercept an incoming ICBM or something like that. That would actually make sense in terms of why the local governments have no idea what's going on. And it would make sense in terms of why the federal government would not be able to speak about it and potentially do a classified briefing. But there's a lot of theories that are plausible out there. That just happens to be the one that I like the best at the moment.
Yeah, the other piece, and as we talked about before, is this idea of a false flag, and perhaps there's some sort of nuclear material that they're trying to warn us and scare us about. This sort of radioactive material that wound up missing from this cargo container coming into New Jersey. Other drone operators saying there's no reason for these things to be operating at night because they can't see at night unless they're using some sort of radioactive sensor technology. So, it's deeply troubling. It's deeply troubling that we don't have answers. But we know, and I agree with you, that they know about this. They absolutely know. They're just people at a low pay grade that probably don't know about this.
Precisely. Yeah. And, with respect to the scanning abilities, if they had like infrared or thermal, great. I think that what we're dealing with here, though, is we can rule out commercial, like low quality, cheap drones. These aren't hobby drones that, they only have 20 to 30 minutes of loiter time. To kind of shift this into the UFO topic as well, one of the things that people have been saying about these is these things have been hovering there for hours. And the question that I think everybody should be asking in the UFO community with respect to flying saucers, UFOs, whatever it is if you see something hovering for hours, our UFO, our flying saucer, what is the energy source of this? How is this thing floating? If you think about a conventional drone, gas is really heavy. That's the big problem, is the weight. So if you want something that's gonna be able to stay up there for a really long time, it needs a lot of fuel in it, but that's really heavy. And so you get to a point where if you're getting over even like 30 minutes of loiter time, now you need to have a battery. It's the only efficient way to do it. But batteries are also really heavy as well. If we have the capability to have craft that can just defy gravity for a day straight, or potentially achieve these hypersonic speeds, which would use this huge amount of energy without rockets, where is that energy coming from? Logically, that energy must be coming from the environment, some other exotic fuel source that we don't currently understand at the moment.
Which is what Nikola Tesla had discovered, right? It's the idea of etheric energy. And this is a story you've been covering now extensively since your research into the disappearance of MH370. This idea that the deep state, the government, the military-industrial complex, these defense contractor companies have been reverse engineering these craft, these downed UFOs, using this technology that they're pulling from the environment, right? So can you maybe explain how and why you think that we have this technology, Nikola Tesla was right, and the government is keeping it from us?
Yeah, and to do that, I'm going to rewind back to the MH370 case for a moment. Now, a lot of what I've been doing has been strategic. When you look at something like the MH370 videos, you realize there's no way in heck they can ever admit to this. Like, this is just so far out there. And this is part of the reason why no one can really believe it to be real. It requires technology that is...
Before we go more deeply into that, why don't you just explain, if someone doesn't even know about the MH370 story, maybe you can just set the stage here and explain, and we'll show these videos of the disappearance of the craft and what you believe actually happened with these orbs that are swirling around MH370.
Yeah, the plane disappeared 10 years ago, and these videos emerged just weeks after the plane disappeared. The most powerful clue is that the person that uploaded them, which was a random no-name account with just like 100 subscribers on YouTube, said that the first video, the satellite video, was received March 12th, 2014. That's 4 days after the plane disappeared. This was before we even had a narrative of the plane going into the South Indian Ocean. Keep in mind, this plane's never been found even 10 years later now. So if somebody was hoaxing videos like this, how would they know we would never find the plane? These videos show the plane literally being surrounded by three orbs in a perfect triangle formation. It looks unnatural, like the way that they spin around the plane in this perfect orientation, which to me screams AI or some type of quantum computer. And then they converge on the plane. You see a flash emerge that illuminates the surroundings in 3 dimensions, which is extremely difficult to produce with visual effects, even today. And then the plane is just gone in an instant. In 0.2 seconds, the plane is no longer there anymore. I believe that this was 6th generational warfare. This is a message to China from the United States government saying, don't mess with us. We've got technology that is light years ahead of where conventional weaponry exists today. I think they did it because of the engineers that were on board, those Freescale semiconductor engineers. People are probably familiar with the other conspiracy theory around them being patent holders. That conspiracy theory actually is not true. Those people weren't, the people in that one related to the Rothschilds were not on the plane. However, there were 20 engineers that were very important people on this plane. 8 of them were Chinese nationals. They were going to China. They worked for a U.S. company that's connected to U.S. aerospace and defense. So I think that we literally have teleportation capability, a wormhole that we can zap an object from one point on Earth to another. I don't know that it was advanced enough in 2014 that you could zap somebody to the moon or to Alpha Centauri or something like that. But that would be like the next level of taking this technology.
Where do you think, but before we move on to the etheric energy piece of this, where do you think that plane is now?
I think that that plane was disassembled at Diego Garcia. I think that it did. I think that they zapped the plane from the Nicobar Islands west towards the Maldives, and that it either landed and they got rid of the people, or they flew it from wherever it showed up south to Diego Garcia. It ended up getting seen by about 15 islanders on a small island north of Diego Garcia in the early morning hours. And the debris that was found, that everybody always says, well, what about the debris? The debris proves that it crashed. It doesn't actually. The debris is a very small amount of debris. And I actually think that was from MH370. The problem is that debris shows up in Africa, which is 2,000 to 3,000 miles away from the search zone. The reason why no one was looking in Africa is because it's impossible for the debris to have drifted there from the location where they say that the plane crashed, where, by the way, we found nothing. So if you believe that that debris is from MH370, then the plane did not crash in the South Indian Ocean. It's not; those are two incompatible ideas. So I think that possibly, if you look at the ocean currents and map it compared to where the debris was found, Diego Garcia is the perfect location for that debris to have gotten into the water.
And any sort of updates on that, again, before we move on to the etheric energy piece, since our last interview, are there any major sort of new revelations in the few years since we've spoken about it?
Yeah, and there are some major ones. First, I want to talk about AARO. You know all about them, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. I submitted the case to them. Everybody gets on my back about, why you trust the government to do all this? Well, I'm like, you've got to go through the official channels. And who knows, maybe we can trap them into admitting the truth. I think we might be able to. Now, in April, they stopped responding to me entirely. I didn't get a response back until November, last month, when I looked up the person, because I was trying to figure out if I had been scammed or something. They just ghosted me and stopped responding. And people were saying, oh, he wouldn't really talk to the ARO. So I found the guy's name, who I had, and I looked him up, and they are 100% legit. Like, they've worked in the Pentagon for many years. They apparently rotated out of their position at AARO and rotated back in, which is interesting. Apparently, that's how AARO operates. They're investigators. They're like military people that come in and come out. My sources tell me they do that to make sure that nothing ever gets done, because that way there's no continuity for the investigators within the AARO. Okay, side the point. I spoke to them after I was going to expose them and point out who they are and how AARO is ghosting me. And long story short, they told me they should have the capability to look into our satellite systems and to look into our drone capabilities, because all I need to prove these videos are real is that if that's really the space-based infrared system we're seeing in that satellite video, it says NROL-22 in the bottom left. That's the first launch of the space-based infrared system. Now, the space-based infrared system broke off, or they had a splinter that's called the Space Tracking and Surveillance System, which used to be called CBERS Low. And then what they did was they took the low Earth orbit satellites and they put them in this separate system. And that STSS system is for tracking the missiles as they are after they've been launched, as opposed to the CBERS system, which is like, once the heat signature of the rocket taking off is detected, then that gives an information to these other systems to continue tracking it. So I said, look into these systems. If you find out that's one of those systems, the videos are real. No random kid bored hoaxer knew about our spy satellite systems. We still don't know about them. And they said they should be able to look in the drone video as well. And they were kind of obfuscating about that, and they hadn't really accomplished anything yet. And then the last bit was Edward C. Lin. I said, I gave you guys the name of the guy that leaked the videos. Edward C. Lin. Anyone who looks up his case, it checks all the boxes. It's got to be this guy. The date range, the fact that his lawyer said that the classified information in question is available on the internet. I'm like, just find Edward C. Lin. Just figure out what it is that he leaked. If it's those videos, it's all over. We get full disclosure from this. Now, I'm hoping I hear back from them. They gave me assurances that MH370 will be submitted in the official AARO record. I don't know when it's going to happen, but eventually it will. And this is important because the AARO's out here saying, no, we've identified all this stuff, all these UFO cases that we get, they're all prosaic. There's a bird, a balloon, it's parallax, blah, blah. This is one they're not going to be able to debunk. And if they can't debunk this one, the UFO community is going to go crazy, because they've been debunking everything that the UFO community says is legit. And for them to not be able to debunk this one, which most of the UFO community really does not like the MH370 case, it'll be quite entertaining. Now, two other huge breakthroughs were we slowed down, and I'll send this video to you so you can superimpose it here, the satellite video, and found that one of the orbs passes through the smoke behind the plane. So it shows accurate fluid dynamics when it does this. Just as if there was a bunch of smoke in front of me and I ran through the smoke, and you would see like the smoke kind of come off in like a silhouette around me. It looks just like that in slow-mo. We only noticed it because we changed the color channels in the video, which allows you to see some of the more small details more clearly. And then if you look back at the original video, yes, you can see it. It's very faint, but it's there, which is a really obscure detail for somebody to add. By the way, no hoaxer has ever come forward with any evidence that they made the videos. Now, I got a message on my YouTube channel just a few weeks ago from somebody who claimed to have worked on the CBERS system, the space-based infrared system, in the late 90s when it was first being set up. I reached out to them. I said, I have to talk to you. I have to confirm your identity, blah, blah, blah. I confirmed their identity. They told me basically all the companies that they ever worked at. They gave me the whole story. They had initially had an unclassified job related to setting up the network connectivity of the CBERS system. They knew that was the CBERS system based on the fact that they were the one that was setting up these data upload and download links. Because what I've been saying too is that these satellites are beaming information from one another and then to ground-based computers. And they explained as well how they were able to increase the bandwidth, basically the data download rate or upload rate. From those satellites by combining together like 8 different feeds. And I don't know much about how all that works, but ultimately this was the big takeaway, was that they said they were 100% sure what we were looking at was the CBERS system based on that. And they had also had a classified job as well, setting up satellites and their connectivity to weapon systems that they were not allowed to talk to me about. I gave that person's name to the AARO as well.
So confirming that video, the MH370 video, is in fact a CBERS video.
Yep. Or maybe the STSS, since that was a breakaway, because he was working on it in the late 90s and it probably started to really be deployed like in the early 2000s. So they may have made some small changes, but yes, confirming that that's a real CBERS video. And I've had anonymous people tell me stuff like I work on those cameras on the drone stuff and say that, that looks like a real drone camera. Anyone that's skeptical, watch the thermal drone video and look at it from the perspective of you being the operator, the person with the joystick controlling that camera. And you'll realize quite quickly that that's a real person controlling a camera, watching a real airplane, as hard as it is to believe.
Right.
Now, let's talk about the etheric,
science and the etheric energy piece of this.
So Bob Greenyer, back in November of last year, he is probably one of the world's leading experts at low energy nuclear reactions, which is what cold fusion rebranded into in the 90s after it got heavily discredited by the government. As a quick side note, I want to point out something that not a lot of people know. Pons and Fleischmann in 1989 made their announcement for cold fusion. There were 60 replications of their experiment, 60. The DOE created a tribunal. The Department of Energy created a tribunal, and they went to all of these sites that were reporting positive recreation results, and they debunked them, and they made them retract their papers one at a time. It's actually unbelievable how much we suppressed cold fusion, and the world has no idea about it. And this isn't to say that Pons and Fleischmann, that their method was the only way to do cold fusion, or even that they were doing it correctly. The point being, the Department of Energy did not want us looking into this. And Bob Greenyer in November, before I even met him, he did a video about the MH370 videos. And the reason why he was doing that is because he noticed that those orbs are balls of plasma consistent with cold fusion or cold plasma. It's not hot fusion. It's not the temperature of the sun. It's a much lower energy level. And he knew, because he could see the heat signature in the orb is consistent with this vortex that's being produced to create stability in this ball of plasma.
This would kind of imply that these are warmer than the environment. And for that to happen, one might expect that if they didn't have their own energy source, they must be extracting the energy from the environment. That the exotic vacuum objects will fire a thing, or it has some sort of projected field out in front of it that will cause other exotic vacuum objects to orbit around them. So there is something that goes out in front. I believe that this is the toroidal moment, the beam that goes out far faster in front of it.
To me, that's one of the hugest corroborations of the videos. How could somebody know to fake that? And the last bit is Salvatore Pais. People have to realize this guy is 100% legit. His patents are legit. He has a magnetically confined plasma fusion reaction patent that was approved under the US Navy. I've been speaking to him. If you go back and watch the interviews, he's been talking about cold plasmas. Cold plasma is the secret to achieving the energy densities required to create a wormhole. This is not science fiction. This is science fact. It's known. All the science is publicly available. It's out there. His Pais effect, that he calls the Pais effect, is literally the Schwinger limit, which is putting so much electromagnetic energy into a region of space-time that it breaks through the fabric of reality. That's the Schwinger limit, and that's also the Salvatore Pais effect. He said in my last interview just a couple of weeks ago with him that when he first saw that video, the drone video with the orbs going around it, he said, I knew what was about to happen. And I'm going, wow, you knew that there was about to be a wormhole? Because when I first watched that video, I'm going, what am I looking at here? Sal saw it and he said, they're building up non-ionized radiation when they're spinning around the plane. And he says, I knew what was going to happen. That's the Pais effect right there in that video.
Oh, man, when I saw those orbs, I saw this thing, this one orb just start exactly what it's doing now. Just start to go around this thing. And all of a sudden, it started join another one and then another one. And I said, oh, my God, they're forming a bubble of non-ionizing radiation around this thing. There's no way. There's no way what's about to happen. I anticipated. Do you understand? I knew before that black hole happened. Let's call it a black hole.
You knew that was going to happen beforehand? Just
I knew that would happen. I knew that would happen. That's why
Really?
when I said, this is it. This is the Pais effect.
So they're spinning around the plane, and then we see the flash of that wormhole, and that's where the plane disappears.
And the reason why we're seeing the flash is because of the Schwinger effect. When you hit the Schwinger limit, real photons get pulled right out of the ether, right out of the vacuum, right out of the 0-point energy field. There's this energy all around us. And we think this happens at the edge of black holes as well. And at the edge of black holes, we're seeing this dynamic Casimir effect where the Schwinger limit's being breached. We're hitting the ceiling on our reality. And when you break through that, light comes out. And so we see that in the satellite video of the light shooting out like that. And those videos are going to prove that 0-point energy is real, this etheric energy. I like to call it the ether because that's what Tesla, Maxwell, all these legends called it. It's probably not exactly the way they described it. It's more of a superfluid medium that is all around us all the time in a fifth dimension that's like infolded at the quantum level that we don't quite see. But that energy is there, and we know experimentally it is there. This is what a lot of people don't realize. So the people that are going to say that this is pseudoscience, I already know all their arguments. First thing they're going to say is, well, 0-point energy is there, but it's not a significant amount of energy. And for those people, I would say, well, you need to go look at Richard Feynman of the Manhattan Project, Nobel Prize winner in 1965 for quantum electrodynamics. Who did he win the Nobel Prize with in 1965? Julian Schwinger, the guy of the Schwinger limit. Richard Feynman said, there's enough energy in empty space of like the size of this coffee cup to vaporize all the Earth's oceans. What that's essentially saying is at the quantum mechanical level, nothing is stopped. What that means is this 0-point energy is not a tiny little amount of 0-point energy. It's a massive amount. It's practically an unlimited amount. And just because we don't actively see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The Lamb shift, Lamb won a Nobel Prize for the Lamb shift. Casimir effect, that Casimir effect was in 1948. Ehrenhoff-Bohm effect. These examples show that there is some field out there and that space itself is not actually an empty vacuum.
So the commercial applications, so Pais gets this patent through or alongside the U.S. Navy. Is this a secret patent? What is he saying about sort of the commercial applications? And I guess this is where we think, so the United States military has access to this, these sort of off-the-books programs using, it would seem, craft or some other vehicles. They've been able to tap in and use this that members of Congress have no idea about, or even the President of the United States has no idea about. Does that seem right?
So, boy, that's a loaded question. I would say I asked him why these patents are even allowed out there.
Yeah.
Like, why would these be allowed? The conclusion I've reached is that China and Russia know it's legit and they're working on it, and maybe they've already got it figured out as well. So once you've reached that point, why hide it anymore? You might as well have it become public. In fact, it becomes awkward if Russia or China make the announcements, but you've already had it figured out for a really long time. So the patents could be a matter of plausible deniability, so that when the science does come out, they can say, we didn't lie to you. We had all these open patents. Why we had these 5 patents here for you? You know, there they are. You know, we weren't lying about this crazy advanced technology that's out there. The presidents, I do think, have been made informed about this. This goes back to your interview you did with Tucker Carlson. In fact, by the way, Salvatore Pais has told me that if Tucker Carlson were to invite me on, or Joe Rogan, that he would come on with me, even though he's not even really allowed to do a lot of interviews, but it seems like he would just be willing to take the risk in that situation. So if either of those guys are listening, Sal has said that he wants to do that. Presidents realize the implications of this, which I want to talk to you a little bit later, are just beyond what most people can comprehend. Like the idea of there being this unlimited energy source that's out there. There are national security issues related to it, weaponization issues, doomsday technology and weapons that can be produced, the socioeconomic impact to our way of life. Like, what even is capitalism if we have no scarcity anymore? So you look at it from that perspective, and the issue is so much bigger than what I think a lot of people understand. And it's certainly much bigger than what the majority of the UFO community is expecting. The UFO community just wants little green men who want to tell us that we're not alone in the universe. To me, that was something I dealt with in the 90s. It's 2024 now. Now I'm like, how do we change our civilization? Yeah, right.
I
love when you said that. It's like, no, we're past it.
Yeah,
right? Like,
I mean, I think we've all got that part of it now. We've figured that out. We have the craft. We know the bodies. All of that piece of it. Now I'm with you on this. Like, free energy that could transform our world. I mean, think about people who are in cold homes right now, freezing, or just even in war-torn areas, and to be able to have etheric energy, something in your own home that is pulling from the environment that heats your home, powers your devices, and and to know that so what you're saying is we have this technology, like we have access to it now, but it's being kept from us and being hidden from us.
Yeah, the defense contractors are probably the ones that are gatekeeping it the most. You could also have energy companies that are involved as well. Some of my sources have told me there's companies like in Europe, for example, that are literally pulling hydrogen, conjuring hydrogen straight out of the ether. So literally elements, not just energy as well. And Bob Greenyer extensively talks about the transmutation capabilities of these plasmas as well. So we're actually talking about Star Trek replicators are in our future. Now, maybe that's 100,000 years down the road, but the base form of it, the plasma that enables all of it, that is, we're staring at it. It's like the discovery of fire. It's always been there. We just haven't known where to look for it. To the point of heating things, these can actually also cool things as well, because you have to look at it that the universe, we're in an equilibrium of energy. Okay. So what we think of as absolute zero is not the bottom. There's more to go. The only question is how much of that energy is there? And that's the big argument, the vacuum catastrophe. Is there really this huge amount of energy under there? But if there is, and we can tap into it, then we're actually reducing the temperature. If we pull energy out of a local region, what I would expect to happen is that in that region, it's going to get colder. When you look at the MH370 drone video, the zap is black. It's cold. And that's the reason. This is a negative energy, negative entropy type event. Now, that's very taboo. A lot of physicists will probably come at me for that. But the key being that we don't feel that energy below zero because we're in the equilibrium. Just like if I'm in my bathtub and it feels like the water is cooling down, it's because my body temperature is equalizing with the water temperature. That's the same thing that is essential or an analogy to what's happening in our universe out there. The next thing people will say is, well, okay, there's this energy out there. Maybe it's a big amount of energy, but there's no way to extract it. And that just makes me laugh. There was actually people like back in the 70s that would say that there's no way to use solar power and get energy out of it. There's no way to use wind power and get energy out of it because you'd be breaking the laws of thermodynamics. And right away, people realize like, no, you're not breaking the laws of thermodynamics. You're adding an extra input, the wind, the sun. So you can get a device, a windmill or a solar panel that can produce more energy out than what's locally what you're injecting into it. This is the same concept as 0 point energy. 0 point energy and free energy. Free energy is a bit of a misnomer, but it's a great name. It doesn't mean that we're producing something directly from nothing. It means that we're tapping in to this 0 point energy, this quantum mechanical energy that's out there. And Robert Forward in 1984 with his paper showed that you could use this pressure of the Casimir effect, where they take two plates, put them together very close, and they just come together naturally, automatically just come together. And what's happening is the area between these plates is pushing out the 0 point energy. Certain wavelengths of 0 point energy can't fit between the plates. And what happens? Then you have more pressure on the outside than you have on the inside, comes together. It's a reverse or a negative pressure that you're feeling. And he showed that from this action that you could charge a battery. And doing that basically proves that we can tap in to the 0 point energy. Of course, it's a crude example, but it's a thought experiment that shows people, yes, it can be tapped into.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. What are the kind of technologies or materials that you would be required to use right now to kind of make 0 point energy viable to the masses? Like you can do this maybe in a laboratory, or maybe these defense contractors have access to this already and they're using it at scale, but we don't know about it. So what sort of materials and technologies would we need to kind of put all this together to make it viable, maybe commercially?
Yeah, it's another great question. And I want to answer all the questions that everybody's thinking. So, okay, in terms of what types of devices I think are the easiest ways to extract 0 point energy that I've looked into right now. First one's magnetic motor. So magnetic motors can produce over unity because a magnetic motor, once you realize that there's this energy that's out there and it's electromagnetic in nature, then what a magnetic motor is doing is it's churning up the ether. It's churning up the ether. Imagine you have some kind of water mill or whatever, and it's pulling the water up from there, and you're trying to pull as much of that energy as you're kind of churning it up. You're trying to grab as much of that energy as you can grab. That's essentially what a magnetic motor is doing. And the way that it achieves the grabbing of the energy is through resonance. So a lot of this has to do with frequency and resonance because the 0 point energy is constantly jiggling back and forth. And so you want to try to tap into some type of resonant frequency that can interact with that 0 point energy very strongly. So a magnetic motor can do it. And a lot of these guys that were building magnetic motors, free energy devices, I think that some of them were working for sure. And that was stuff back in like the 70s, 80s. Joseph Newman, John Searle, John Hutchinson, Bandini, Tom Bearden, all these guys, they all get discredited because everybody didn't realize that there's this energy we can tap into. To me, that's an archaic way of doing it at this point and probably relatively inefficient. It's still magic because having a magnetic motor would be pretty cool in your house. We don't use that much energy, but the cooler ways to do it, the ways that we're doing it now, microchips. There's a patent called Casimir cavities by Garrett Model and Bernard Haish. Bernard Haish was a Lockheed Martin engineer. Model is professor emeritus at University of Colorado. And the way that they do it is they basically say, let's look at it from the atomic level. So if I've got my atom and I've got this electron orbital, just kind of like a Earth spinning around the sun, I'm going to squeeze it and pull a little bit of energy out of it by changing that orbital. And then I'm going to have it go into an empty cavity, just an empty region of space, and it's going to gain back that energy from the 0-point energy field. Basically like being on a trampoline. So I jump on my trampoline, I jump high in the air, trampoline resets, I hit the trampoline again, and I bounce up again. Same concept, except for from the quantum mechanical level, we're doing this at the very tiniest scales. So what they do is they're basically just saying, what would it take to pull that off? Oh, I need a semiconductor, and then I need an insulator, and then another semiconductor. And what this allows is for this quantum tunneling effect to occur, where you have a barrier and the energy level normally wouldn't be able to get over the barrier, and it would just hit like this. But quantum mechanics says it just quantum tunnels right through the barrier. And that's the kind of device that they've built. And then they have a cavity and they just repeat that. So you could take a very simple idea like that, where we're now looking at what's the most fundamental way to engineer this. And you put it onto a tiny microchip, smaller than the tip of my nail here. And you make it extremely small. And the reason why you do this is that Casimir effect I was just explaining to you, it gets exponentially more powerful the smaller you get, the closer the plates get to one another. In fact, the Casimir effect is so powerful that when people are making microchips, they have to be careful about any two metal surfaces coming close to one another because they'll just stick together, and they're so small, there's no way to pull them back apart again. So this would be, to me, that's the coolest way. Like, I'm literally going to steal that patent when it expires in 2 years, because can you imagine a microchip where you just put it in your phone and the phone never stops, permanent battery? Like, incredible. So those are the first two ways. And actually, go ahead if you want to give comment on that one, because it's
almost pictures like the little monkey, the tambourine, like back and forth. Like that's kind of like that's how I'm picturing it in my brain, my monkey brain. Another thing just comes to mind as you're talking about these patents and this application of it is like, where does Elon Musk fit into this? I mean, here's a guy with SpaceX, and he's been kind of really quiet on this whole drone thing. And it's like, I know he's got these like government contracts, and so my brain immediately wonders like, he's got to be aware of this. Why is he involved in this somehow and have some sort of secret, involvement here? I mean, with SpaceX and everything else he's been developing with satellites and Tesla driving cars and self-driving cars and everything else.
I mean, he's got to. Tesla is his company, and Tesla is the guy that figured out alternating current, the power we still use today. He was the one saying that radiant energy, free energy, was real before quantum mechanics was even a thing. And so you're like, and he's got a rocket company. He's talking about wanting to make us interstellar species. And I'm sitting here going, well, here's all the answers. How can he not know? How can he not know? He's got to. And he's like, I think the biggest defense contractor. He's got all these top secret contracts for shooting spy satellites in outer space now. SpaceX is what's shooting all these spy satellites into orbit. I don't think he's legally allowed to comment on the MH370 satellite video because of that. It's so weird that he's never made any comments about it. And the drone stuff, like you said, he's not really commenting on. It does make you wonder, and I have it on pretty good authority. I mean, I've literally seen pictures of Black Project engineers, like with politicians, where you're like, okay, these people know, because the Black Project engineers that I'm seeing in the pictures know about this stuff. So what you realize is there is this elite group of people, usually rich people, sometimes politicians, anyone connected to these engineers that have access to this level of technology. Now, how much do they know? How much are they allowed to push? That's a different story. My guess is that Elon's got NDAs that prevent him from speaking on a lot of this stuff that's out there. But even if it is real, it doesn't hurt him, because the moment it becomes accepted mainstream, his company has the money and the resources to immediately start working on it. So even if he's working on obsolete rocket technology, he could, the moment that it's accepted that, oh no, we have this electrogravitic capability, he can immediately just shift gears and it's not going to miss a beat,
Right.
So the last one, and this is the one that affects propulsion, is plasma. Plasma. This is the thing that, man, even when we were talking a year ago, I really had no idea what that plasma was really going to be the missing link in the whole UFO topic. It's possible that plasma itself is some sort of fundamental discovery of the universe, just like fire, where all of our rockets, explosion, combustion engine, everything's based on fire. But now you look at plasma, and plasma has these natural, incredible properties, including the biggest one is that it can hold charge density higher than any material that we know of today. Now, metamaterials at some point in the future might be able to improve and get and achieve this. But if you were to pack the amount of energy that we can get into a plasma into any circuitry that we have out there, it would melt the wires. And that's the main limitation on that. It was Ken Shoulders in the late 1980s who realized that these plasmas, he called them exotic vacuum objects because he believed they were cohering energy from the vacuum, from the ether. He realized they have this self-organizing property where it will become naturally a sphere. And there's a funny comment that Sal was telling me in my interview where he said, I forget the guy's name. Hope somebody out there probably know and put it in the comments, but that they were talking about this hot fusion, these tokamak reactors that we have everywhere. And he was kind of throwing shade at it, saying, I've never seen a star in the shape of a donut before. And you kind of laugh and you go, yeah, in outer space, all the stars are plasma, but they're always spherical. Why are we building all our reactors in the shape of donuts? And we do that because that's a way to focus the electromagnetic field so that the electromagnetic field will be like in the center of the donut. But is that what the shape that the plasma will ultimately form? No, I think it's going to form a sphere. And then he realized not only is it cohering energy from the vacuum, the reason why he thought it was doing that was because their longevity. It would stay even though you stopped applying energy to it. It didn't dissipate. It would stay there. And he explains this. He has a book called like The Path to EVOs. And in this book, he says that in 1980, he read a paper by a guy named Bergstrom. The paper is from 1973. And in that paper, he realized that the ether is actually real. So what is he saying there? He's saying the same thing that I was just telling you guys, is that he realized in 1980, there is this energy that's out there. And if space isn't actually empty and space itself is a medium, then we can manipulate the medium. And the plasma is doing that. The plasma is actually changing the properties of the medium itself. So when people talk to you about metamaterials, the reason why they say you need metamaterials is because they don't think we can modify space-time. They don't think we can change the refractive index of space-time, the permittivity of space-time. If you change the permittivity of a material, you change the speed of light through the material. Just like when people show the image of a refractive index where you have like a cup of water and they put a stick in there and you can see it kind of bend. This is why we think we need metamaterials to produce UFOs and anti-gravity. But if you can actually do that to space-time itself, where now you create a bubble in space-time, now you've got a situation where you can have anti-gravity, you can have a huge amount of charge density where this is basically becomes an infinite battery. And you have the charge density required, the charge density that can be achieved in this bubble of plasma energy is so high that you're now starting to approach what Sal Pais would say is that the Pais effect, the schwinger limit that's out there. So last thing I'm going to say in this, and I'll let you jump in, is that people need to say the name Hal Puthoff way, way, way more often. He should have won a Nobel Prize. I have it on extremely good authority that he's willing to go to his grave knowing that he'll never win the Nobel Prize, even though he deserves it, because he's never going to violate his NDAs. He's never going to expose the defense contractors that he's worked for. He knows about all this stuff.
So-called empty space isn't really empty at all. It's actually full of energy. So instead of being like kind of a quiet, empty lake, it's more like the froth at the base of a waterfall or something. And this energy is basically electromagnetic in nature. And the energy density is quite high. In fact, it's so high that when it was first discovered mathematically, it was thought to be some kind of artifact of the mathematics. But then as time went on, there were even Nobel Prize winning experiments that showed that this energy in so-called empty space was really there.
Ken Shoulders' partner was Hal Puthoff. They both worked at SRI, Stanford Research Institute. They were partners when they were working on this exotic vacuum object technology in the late 80s. Their financier was a guy named Bill Church of Church's Chicken, the CEO, if you can believe it. And so this is when Hal Puthoff started writing all his scientific papers about zero-point energy at the exact same time. So Hal Puthoff realized there was an ether. He started writing his papers on zero-point energy. Zero-point energy explains gravity as a pressure force. And in the early 90s, from Lynn McTaggart's book called The Field, she explains that the Pentagon it was really cold fusion is what they were producing. They called it condensed charge research. They gave it this kind of code name. And the Pentagon ranked it as number 3 highest priorities for research. And then the next year, they upgraded that to number 2. So this was all based on this plasma technology. And in 1992, a scientist named Jack Nachamkin for the Air Force wrote a scientific paper called Force-Free Time Harmonic Plasmoids. So if you hear the word plasmoids, you hear the word EVOs, exotic vacuum objects, ball lightning, these are all synonyms for the exact same thing. And Jack Nachamkin basically said that we can, using a vortex, you can stabilize the ball of plasma, and what will happen is it'll create a non-radiating barrier, a bubble around it by manipulating the Poynting vector. So, and I won't go too much into this science, but if you make your electric and magnetic fields parallel when normally they should be perpendicular like this, then you change your Poynting vector to 0. And in that situation, now the energy is not propagating in any specific vector direction. And so instead, what do you create? A bubble. And this bubble can then be stabilized. And from there, now you've got a stable bubble that energy is not radiating out of it. And you can potentially use that to extract energy. It can float around freely. Oh, and then I do have to say one last thing as well. So we've now tied Ken Shoulders, Hal Puthoff to the government, to this research into these EVOs. And these can become drones. These can actually become drones because Hal Puthoff's patent, he only has really one significant patent that's out there called communication system. And it is a field-free, meaning no electromagnetic field communication system. He calls it quantum communication system, which is just a bullshit cover. It's a gravity communication system. And he says literally in the patent, in the abstract, you can communicate through plasma with this. So you start to realize, oh, we can create a plasma bubble. We can put a little device inside of there. And now we can communicate with it using Hal Puthoff's patent.
What about time travel? Does this confirm does this confirm time travel exists?
So if you change the permittivity of space, you manipulate the amount of zero-point energy in a region. In the case of the plasma, it's reducing the permittivity. It's pushing out the zero-point energy, just the way the Casimir effect was doing it. So it's a different engineering aspect. If you're doing that, if you're modifying the speed of light, you are technically modifying time. You're creating a time dilation effect as well. This is part of the reason why I would say you don't want to have somebody inside these things. I would not want to be inside of these things. It would be extremely disorienting to go inside of some type of craft, fly for an hour, and you come out and it's a year later. And you're like, wait, what? Time dilation is real,
Wow.
Which means that time travel is real, but it's not the same kind of time travel that we're seeing in science fiction, except for maybe in the case of Interstellar, which I think they kind of got it right, which would mean that what you can do is you can change your dial so that time either moves faster or slower for you. The real question then is, what is negative time? There is a concept of negative time in physics that mathematically works out, but it's not like you're going to go back to 1950 and go meet your grandparents. I would argue, and this is highly speculative, of course, that instead what you're doing is you're reversing your local state. So you would maybe reverse your age. Like maybe I would go back a year if I could apply negative time. Otherwise, the more conventional uses would be that you can go to the future, but you could never really go to the past. So you could slow your rate of time down. Everything else is speeding up around you, and then you would be in the future. That is possible. And if that's possible, this explains why we might have moved to stuff like plasma drones or other drone type technology where no one's in there, because it's the spam in the can. It's a liability to have a person inside one of these crafts where you have to keep them alive, where you have to have some sort of atmosphere inside the craft, because it has to be perfectly sealed as well. You can't have openings on these crafts for this. This is also going to be a really, I think, interesting anecdote, but our spy planes, I don't think people realize how hypersonics work. They use plasma sheaths in front of this, in front of these hypersonic crafts. And this is what reduces the drag so that the craft doesn't rip apart from the friction of our atmosphere. They use a plasma sheath that they produce. And you think about that, we had that in the 60s. It was Paul Sis who basically explained this technology to me. And once I heard him explain it, he's a Black Project engineer, I went, wow, we can actually just turn the plasma into a drone. We don't need the plane. We don't need the person inside of it. Those are the liability. Just turn the plasma sheath itself into a hypersonic drone that can ignore inertia, gravity, etc. So that's what I think that we pretty much figured out there. And then I don't know what's going to happen with the time travel aspect of it. I'm just interested to learn more.
For sure. I would love to do an entire deep dive about time travel because it's one of the most fascinating topics in my life. I've loved it since childhood. I mean, so many amazing revelations here. And I would encourage our audience to want to dive more deeply into MH370, follow Ashton's work. Also go back and watch our previous interview where we spent really over an hour deep diving that particular part of the story. So many pieces of this with etheric energy that I'm excited over the next year to see where this develops and really to have you back on the show to dive more deeply into it. So my guest, Ashton Forbes, who just confirmed time travel is real. But it's not what you think. Time travel is real. Get your flux capacitor out. Ashton, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and thanks for bringing this incredible information to our audience as always.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to do a quick shout out to my Aunt Margot. She's in the hospital right now. She helped raise me and make me the person that I am today. Margot, if you're out there, I love you. Thank you very much.
And let's the power of the Redacted audience. Everyone, put Margot in their prayers and send as much energy and love to you and the family as we can. So thank you, and God bless Margot. We hope for a speedy recovery. Thanks, Ashton.
Thank you.